All right, let's kick it off. Well, good morning, everybody. Wanted to thank everybody for attending another episode of Let's Talk Recruiting. I think we're entering in our third week. Everything's going really great. I think the conversations we've been having have been going very interesting. So I'm glad to see everybody keep coming back. I think that's a good sign. So today's topic is going to be what it takes to become a black belt in recruiting. And our panelists from across the country today are Dana Bozich out of Minneapolis. We have Jessica Morota, and am I saying that correctly, Jennifer? Or Jessica?
Murata, yep.
Morata, gotcha. And Tracy Anderson out of Chicago, and Eric Jackreath out of Phoenix. So those are our panelists today, and what we're going to do is sort of talk shop around being one of those experienced, highly professional corporate recruiters that we all love to have on our team. And I'm just going to do a round robin with the panelists. For the attendees, if you have any questions or comments, I will start the chat going. And for the panelists, I'm going to try and keep an eye on that too. But if you see anything in there that you want to chat back to, feel free to do that. But with that said, Dana, we're going to start it off for you. What item do you want to highlight today?
So with thinking about it, for me, I think the biggest thing that what recruiters need, I mean, obviously there's the relationship aspect of it, but it's also the perseverance, because I think that with our positions, we have so many highs and so many lows, and sometimes those lows hit you really hard, and sometimes, and the highs are really great. And, for me personally, I mean, I've been recruiting for longer than I look. So it's really, to me, I don't think that a lot of people really understand how much emotional work recruiters put into it and how you really have to build that resilience. And some days, I mean, it's great, and other days it's really hard.
Dana, what's a good motivator you think to keep that resilience? In some other sessions, we've kind of talked about how a lot of recruiters kind of share agency experience, like they spent some time at some point in time in an agency. And when you're working in a staffing agency, the clear-cut motivator is commission, right? Money. But when you get into corporate recruiting, you don't get to pick the recs you work on. They are your hiring managers. You're there to support them. You can get beat down at times. What are your thoughts on keeping that persistence? And that was one of the popular items that the group submitted when they registered around that persistence. Do you have any what keeps you going type thoughts?
I mean, because I do have an agency and a staffing background before I came over to Sedgwick. And you're right with that, you get that perfect candidate, you get that nice bonus, it's great. But on the corporate side, you don't get that. However, on the corporate side, for me, it's when you're calling a candidate and they start crying on the phone because they are so happy that you called and they're getting the job. And it's just, and with a lot of those too, it makes your heart so full, and it's a great feeling. Does it happen every day? No. I mean, but I think when it does happen, and it's very fulfilling. And even too, when you have those really hard to fill roles, like those more executive level positions and the higher manager positions, finding the right candidate as well, because it still goes back to on the agency side and finding that right piece, and and knowing that person's going to work out.
Do you celebrate wins in any formal way at your company? By win, I mean like a hard-fought hire.
Not so much. I mean, because with our talent acquisition team, we're spread all across the United States, and we also support multiple offices throughout the United States as well. So, I mean, we're really remote. And this was even before COVID-19 and everything else like that. That's how we've always been. So not really. I mean, sometimes on our team calls, like we'll be like, yay, like finally got that. And, but it's not, I mean, it's more like little wins that we just celebrate between ourselves.
How about anybody else in the group? We're sort of sticking with Dana's topic around persistence and perseverance. To me, that motivation is like a key ingredient in keeping that versus like, oh, I have a really good rhythm on workflow and what have you, but that mindset and motivation. And again, I think this is kind of true with all agencies, I'm guessing here, but that motivation, the ringing the bell if you're old school or what have you, but that celebrating, that's one distinction I saw between agency and corporate is that energy around getting those wins. In corporate, hey, you're doing your job, that's your job. Anybody have any ways that they kind of celebrate wins in a corporate setting that is sort of unique or interesting?
I think metrics have a good way of doing that. I think certain types of metrics can be very uplifting. Trending, streaks, being able to show, accomplishments that are persistent over time. So, reports can be made where you're showing, in baseball, for example, your winning streak, how many, frequent days has something happened, or how many have you hit goals as a team, has 80% of you or 90% of you hit goals. So I think measuring the right kinds of things can really make a difference to motivation, and it helps with the endurance.
Tracy, Jessica?
Yeah, I would agree with Eric. I've always actually worked in corporate. I've never worked in agency, so I feel like there's a little piece of me that's missing sometimes when it comes to the recruiting world. But I do think that in corporate, you're right? That's part of our job. So it's fill it, move to the next one. It can often be that cycle that you get into. But I go back to Eric, which is, holy moly, we filled this job that typically takes us, 3 months and 45 days. And so let's talk about the wins, but then also let's learn from that. I go back to what Dana was talking about, the perseverance. I feel like when I have lows, right? I have, maybe it's a week where I have 3 offers declined. And it's like, how can this keep happening? And so it ebbs and flows. And so sometimes I just need to put it down and walk away and then come back with that fresh perspective and a fresh set of breath in to breathe new life into it. And then go back to when you do finally fill that job, it's celebrate it. And then let's dissect it a little bit and figure out, where the wins were and where we could have improved.
Yeah, Eric, to your point, so I'm in recruiting operations, right? So I always in charge of the reporting essentially. And wherever I go, we would do a weekly scorecard where every Monday morning this report comes out, and one of the metrics tracked is, and on January 1st, it all reset to 0. And through the year, you see the progression. So the recruiters would watch total hires for the year. And I would always get questions as we came to the end of the year. Well, kind of sort of throughout it between the first place person and the second place person. So it's kind of like a friendly competition of, hey, I'm right in that race. I want to get that, especially if somebody's on a contract, right? They're a contract recruiter, making sure that, hey, my value is there. If their contract is coming up for renewal, to be on that top as that point. So being on that leaderboard, so to speak, was always kind of interesting. You start putting numbers up for people. Boy, there's those first couple of weeks of shock. Okay, how are you getting those? And then once everybody understands it and gets into the rhythm, it becomes, to me, like that motivational piece where it's that fun piece. And if you are always on the bottom, you need to start realizing that and do something about that. So that's a motivator too. But yeah, besides agency types of promotion, I don't want to keep harping on agencies because I left agencies for a reason a long time ago. But I do like how they celebrate the wins, and I've yet to see that type of vibe of energy in corporate recruiting. I know everybody's good. They're happy what they do. Dana, to your point, I think it's a lot of feel good working with people and helping people get what they want, where they want and stuff like that. So it's a lot of emotional, which is fantastic. But every now and then I'd love to see a company that rings a bell. Someone come with that kind of spirit of that around that, especially around hard to gets, or everybody, when you have that recruiter meeting, tells a story of that manager that took forever and they're always a problem. And I got that bill, right? I made that bill. He got the hire. They hired the candidate I told them to hire. So that kind of motivation piece of it. Dana, did you have anything else that you wanted to add, or anything else around perseverance?
No, I think it's one of those things where, you have to be cognizant of it and keep yourself motivated. And that's the hardest thing, is, as Jessica was saying, there are times where you have bad weeks, or, you go through and you negotiate your heart out and the candidate accepts, and then the next day they take another job offer. And it's just, getting back up and doing it again. And that's the hardest thing about what we do, is being able to keep doing that over and over and over and over again.
Yeah,
So that was the one thing I was going to kind of touch on was, I too have a long agency background and then transitioned to corporate. But one of the things that I think we all, those of us that have worked in staffing firms, know, the initial offer, you celebrate a little, but you really don't celebrate until butts in seat, right?
Yeah. Celebrate a little. You don't even mention an offer. You got to wait till that deal is done.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
And actually, you have to wait until that guarantee period is over, right? So if it's a 30-day guarantee, you really don't celebrate until after, on that 31st day is when you actually begin to celebrate.
I could never wait that long. As soon as the offer letter is accepted and we got to start date.
Sweating for the first 30 days. But I do think, and I do think one of the reasons why it's good to have a mixture, some diversity in corporate recruiting. So folks that come from agencies and folks that don't, because folks that come from agencies, we also have, in my view, a sense of urgency, right? Because we're on commission, and because, there's some competition in the office. And I think that feeds over to folks in corporate that don't come from agencies. They see how we work, how fast we work, how, we work late, how we work on weekends if we have to, and if possible, if we go and check our person in on the first day, things of that nature. And I think folks that don't have that background begin to see value in how we do things, and so that we can make sure that person does stay, because
Right.
we are the first, we're the first line of communication, right? For any candidate, right? They view their opinion on the company based on us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think, people that don't come from the staffing firms then see why we work the way that we work.
Interesting. Excellent. Okay. So Jessica, we're going to sort of jump over to you. And you're right.
Yeah. I love what Tracy said. So I can't wait till she shares. And because I agree, again, I go back to someone who's always been in corporate recruiting. There's a piece of something that I learned from my peers who have been agency as well. That you don't get from corporate recruiting. So I've been in corporate recruiting for 20 years, right out of school, jumped right into a recruiting coordinator job. And what I wanted to talk to today, hiring managers, partnering with hiring leaders, right? So we're a service, we can be seen as a service role, right? And so earlier in my career, I tended to want to be that people pleaser. Yep, you're right. I was wrong. Yep, whatever you want, you're totally, yep, that person's going to work in this role. And, this now latter part of my career, most recently, the past, probably 5 to 8 years, I've shifted more to be somebody who will challenge the thinking of the leaders a little bit more, right? Ask more questions, less about the who, what, where, why, and more about what does it mean? Why are you doing it? Why do you need this right exact person? Pushing back if they don't, I talked to this person, I think they'd be a great fit for your role. I'm going to put them on your calendar. Let me see their resume. Nope, they're not going to be a good fit. Really having those challenging conversations about you being somebody who's so well versed in the business that you are an expert, that you know why this person would be a good fit. And those are some of my favorite wins, when the hiring manager has not seen that person. No, I don't think they're going to be a fit based on the paper, based on what you shared. And then they end up being a great hire and having a successful career at your organization. So I think it's multifaceted to be such a strong recruiter. And part of that is the leading, the relationships that you have with those leaders, being seen as the expert, so that you have a seat at the table. And it took me a long time to get there, but I have leaders, CMOs. I'm recruiting for the CMO for her direct report right now, saying, what do you think? Like, what did you think when you talked to this person? And it takes a long time to get there.
Jessica, kind of to the seat at the table deal, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever go into the business units that you support? Do you ever go in and sit in on their team meetings?
Yes. So team meetings, and it's great to be involved in things like all hands or shadow a customer. client, something that they're doing where you can get a feel for what their job really entails, a day in the life of. And then in the team meetings, when I first kick off a role, I'll go to the team meeting to talk more about sourcing efforts and where to find these people, and what made you to come to 4-star, what made you excited about here. So picking the brains not just of the hiring manager, but the teams as well.
Do you ever speak about your recruiting efforts in those team meetings?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So typically I'll ask to come to a team meeting not long after kickoff.
Is that typically something you have to ask to get into?
It's a mix. So I've been invited, and I've asked, this worked really well with X's team. Would it be okay if I came to your team meeting and did it as well?
Yeah, my experience, whenever I've seen a recruiter get inside those business unit team meetings, I've never seen it be a bad thing. It's always like
Never.
a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
How about anybody else? Anybody else do the business unit team meetings?
I have standing meetings with one of my groups. Started with Sedgwick because I never had recruited in insurance before. It was meeting with a lot of the team leads, actually, and I did some shadowing as well, just sitting through with people to see what their actual day-to-day was like, to see what type of candidates I would want to look for them. Because it's what we do is so niche. There's not a whole lot of other companies that do it. So you don't have a lot of people who necessarily have that background that's going to be a fit for these roles. So we have to go out and, or I should say me, has to go out and find ways to find candidates that have the right skill sets to do the job, but they don't have that insurance background.
Mm-hmm.
What about when it comes back to, Jessica, to your point, having those tight relationships and meaningful relationships with your hiring managers? What about meeting outside of the business function, where just, for example, coffee, breakfast, lunch, where it's not talking about your rec load or hiring, but it's just one person to another, enjoying company? Do you ever do that, or is it always business?
Yeah, I think when we were so busy, and then all of a sudden this happened, and it was like, oh my gosh, now I have this time during one-on-ones to chat with people a little bit more. We don't do enough. I don't do enough of it. I should do more.
Yeah. It's easier said than done. Go ahead.
No,
Tracy.
Absolutely. I was going to say that took the words right out of my mouth. So because, for example, I recruit nationally for a lot of our waste facilities, hazardous waste facilities, it is very difficult to get out on a regular basis, just simply because I have to fly everywhere, and it's
Right.
hard. But to your point, when I go to the facilities, I am talking to the hiring managers. I am doing the tour. I am sitting down and talking to candidates. It is nice to see sometimes the candidates that I've placed, and just kind of talking to them about how they like the job, and things of that nature. How are things going? Walk me through exactly what you do, so that, again, as I'm recruiting, it helps me heighten how I'm explaining the position. So it heightens my credibility with the candidates, right? When I'm talking to them about the role, they're like, oh my God, she's so knowledgeable. But it also builds credibility with your hiring managers that I have taken an interest, right, in waste, right? Because, it's not the most exciting thing to recruit for, but I'm taking an interest, and to your point, we then tend to do dinner afterwards. And I really think that's where the relationship begins to build and flourish, because we are away from work. We're talking about families, we're laughing, you're figuring out people's personalities, their sense of humor, and things of that nature. And I have found that once I've done that, then my credibility is heightened. We have a much better working relationship. I do then appear more as a SME to them, right? Hey, I'm the expert in the market. And I think then they're more apt to listen and take my advice.
Yeah, I think what Tracy just said and hit on is really important. She's the expert in the market. right? Not just in the company that she recruits for, not just in the type of industry that she recruits for, but she knows this market and she knows it well. And that's part of the trust that you need to build.
Excellent. Anything else to Jessica's point? All right, Tracy, let's jump over to you.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was building relationships, positive relationships with candidates. Again, we're the frontline person. We are the initial contact that they have. And I think, and again, I've been doing this, like everyone else, over 20 years, agency experience, corporate experience. I've recruited in various industries, energy, environmental services, as well as insurance. I worked for Allstate for quite some time as well. But I think in terms of building the relationship with the candidate, that's key to them also wanting the interview and wanting to stay with the company. Typically what I do is, first get them excited about the company. That initial phone call, especially my company, Veolia, not many folks are aware of who we are. So now I have, and they do some research, but it's not a very simple organization to understand. So I kind of giving them the behind the scenes understanding of the organization and really getting them pumped. Well, now they're excited about, the position, but also I'm listening to them, right? Because really my role is to understand who they are, right? And to see if my role in the organization is a fit to what they're looking for. So listening is really key when you're talking to, in my view, when you're talking to a candidate, because also I can let them know whether or not this is going to be a fit or not. And I think they respect that more as well. But also I can address those things that are important to them if we do have that, if we match that. The other thing that I do, which comes from working on the agency side, if I have a candidate that I really like, and I really do feel they are a match for the role, however, in talking to them, some of their interviewing skills may not be up to par. I still take that time to prep the candidate, which I know is not really heard of in corporate recruiting, but I think that's also important because although they may not still get the role, I'm prepping them. I'm giving them information that they may not have ever received before.
Yes.
And I think that still keeps them excited about the organization, so that although they didn't get the job, if someone asks them or they hear about the company, they're still going to have a positive experience with Veolia and go, hey, I interviewed, but you know what, I didn't get the job, but oh my God, I got some other great information from the recruiter that I spoke with. So I think I think that's important in terms of being a good recruiter and being that first contact that a candidate has. Also, in terms of dealing with the hiring managers, I think we also build credibility by talking to asking them how they interview. How do you interview? What types of questions are you asking? Sending them information. These are questions you can't answer. Again, I deal with a lot of facilities, a lot of hiring managers that, probably have not really had anyone walk them through how to conduct an interview. I've had a couple of people that when I go to the facilities and I sit down with them, and some of the questions that they tell me or some of the things they say they ask, I just kind of cringe. I'm like, oh my God, no, you cannot go. Oh my God, you don't look any older than 25. No, I can't have you say that in an interview. But again, I'm building the credibility with the hiring manager as well. The best thing is whenever you have a new hiring manager, right? Because then you can just mold. I always go, oh yeah, I can mold this one, the way I want them to be. But those are some things that I think from being, getting my black belt, if you will, in recruiting, you have to be an expert in both arenas. And you also have to, I think, again, prep those candidates, make the candidates feel good about the interaction they've had with your organization.
Tracy, have you ever had such a good relationship with a candidate and tell me if this would be and this is to everybody, if this would be crossing the line with the candidate. Let's say you have a great relationship with the candidate, they're a great candidate, you submit them through, but hey, they got beat out, they didn't get the position. Would it be crossing that candidate line to go back to them in the future and ask for referrals?
No, not at all. I think they're more apt to give me referrals because they've had such a great, rapport with me. Because I always ask for referrals. Like, again, coming from the agency side, you always ask for, who do you know? Who do you know?
Yeah.
And I, so no, I honestly do not. I've never had anyone be offended and I'm very blunt when I ask for referrals too. Like, my whole spiel is, who do you know? And do not send me your trifling friends. We all love our friends, but we all know those who do not go to work all the time, who do not keep their job. Don't send me those friends. Send me the friends, like you. So I'm very clear about what type of referral I want as well.
Gotcha. One quick thing on your thing about prepping the candidate. There seems to be like a very thick line when it comes to prep or not to prep. I believe in prepping the candidate. I've had recruiters like, I'm not going to prep them. They have to prep themselves. If they want the job, they have to go do their homework. And then the other side is that, why wouldn't you prep the candidate? So sort of to let the group.
I say prep. I prep all of my candidates. I don't do their homework for them. It's their job to learn about Forrester, to learn about the people they're interviewing with, to come prepared. We do behavioral-based interviewing. So I give them a heads up, hey, this is coming. So make sure that, here are some things you can do as you're thinking about answers. Pause, silence, ask them to repeat, things like that, right? It's the intangible stuff that sometimes people can lose jobs for, that's within their control. And it goes back to what Tracy said. There are things they may never hear. If you go back to that radical, I think it's a TED Talk of radical candor, finding out from Sheryl Sandberg, you said too many times in your presentation. Wow, no one ever told me that, right? So it's us just preparing them, and then it's theirs to lose when they come in the door.
I mean, I look at it this way. When I had internship openings, right, we're dealing with students, right, who probably have interviewed maybe for jobs at McDonald's, which really isn't an interview, right? It's if you show up, you're going to get hired. So a lot of times what I talk to them about is typically in college, students have done their research on the organization, especially if it's in the field that they're interested in. I talk to them more about, arriving 15 minutes early, dressing for success. Leave your phone in the car, so that you're not even tempted to check your phone, even in the waiting room. I mean, I go so far as to very granular, firm handshake, eye contact, have your questions written down prior to the interview. You want to have 3 to 5 questions written down, things of that nature. At the end of the interview, thank them for their time. Let them know that you're very interested in the opportunity, because hiring managers don't know. Let them know. So I get very granular when I'm prepping a candidate.
Gotcha. So I got a good question from Joel Elmer in the chat, but I want to get to Eric's point. Tracy, I'm going to probably follow up with you after, just so we can stay on track, because there's some really good questions coming in. Maybe okay. Sort of a post session, and we'll answer those back. But if we have time, we'll switch back to them. Eric, let's sort of jump right over to you. And real quick, Tracy, were you good? I don't want to cut off anything like that.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Eric, let's sort of jump over to your item.
Yeah, when I've been looking for black belt candidates or interviewing candidates that would join the team, I'm always looking for that advantage of a candidate that knows their numbers, knows their stats. I'll get very granular in knowing some odd stats that maybe they haven't kept track of, because the company will often keep track of how many hires you have, and companies will keep track of how many offers you had. Many candidates do track their numbers, and many candidates that track their numbers know some very important numbers. One of the numbers I think is really critical that differentiate a good candidate from a mediocre producer is their catch rate. Know their response rates on their outreach. So I call it their 2-day chase rate. If you have the advantage of having sourcers on the team, if you have your team broken up and it's international, oftentimes you'll have U.S. recruiters give in leads, either inbound leads or applicants coming off job boards, or you'll have leads coming from your sourcers. And a recruiter oftentimes ignores those leads as abundant or doesn't really give the effort necessary to really differentiate themselves. So if you're in marketing, you know your response rates to your marketing activities. You know if you've been effective in marketing or not. We're not talking about job posting here. We're talking about if you have a list of candidates given to you, and I gave you 100 a month, if I gave you 20 a month, how many of those did you catch in the first, second, or third day? I want to know that number, and I measure that number with every recruiter on the teams, because their chase effectiveness has a lot to do with their candidate's perception of the urgency, the sincerity, the professionalism, and that will help them close more candidates down the road. But it all begins with initial contact and screening, and how and when they do that, from the time of day they make those calls, to the frequency in between the calls, to the professionalism of the voicemail and the email of those calls. And I think a lot of recruiters just overlook that. They really get focused on sourcing. They really get fixed on the operations of scheduling interviews and scheduling and even negotiations and offers and onboarding. But the piece that most recruiters really don't spend a lot of time focusing on is their chase effectiveness, measuring that and performing that very, very well. So interested in hearing anybody's feedback and thoughts on that as well.
Eric, how would a recruiter know that number? How would they find out that number?
Most applicant tracking systems and ATS and CRMs don't provide it. Right. It's a calculated number. If you're in operations, you can see how many outreach messages you send, how many phone calls you make to a select number of candidates in a given week, given month, or a given campaign. And then knowing, so you have a start date, you have a date in which those things happen, and then you have an end date when the candidate actually calls back and schedules or tells you to leave him alone, or you actually do a phone screen then. If you know your start and stop date, then you can easily calculate your conversion. Is it a 1 day? We actually measured it same day, next day, and 2 day. When I was working with Amazon, we actually calculated when was the best time to stop chasing a candidate for a full-time permanent job for a technical role in the United States. So many companies want to find out, where is the point of diminishing return? Is it on the second day? If it's a staffing firm, an agency, you may not even have a job after the second or third day of chasing someone because an agency, another competitor filled the job. But in corporate, some of these corporate jobs can be open for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, and candidates can be chased for much longer, but there's a point of diminishing return. If you don't hear back from a candidate within 5 to 7 days, do you really spend another 5 to 7 days chasing them for their 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th attempt in a given period of time? How do you make those attempts? Those are all things that you can measure, and most companies don't measure them because it's hard to measure them.
Anybody else want to comment? I got a follow up, but I want to hog the conversation.
I think that's a cool number or to pull. Would it work? So we don't have sourcers. So it's a little challenging. It sounds like it would have to be a larger team with some sourcing efforts, Eric.
No, if you source your own candidates, we just, once again, a lot of the recruiters on the teams have spreadsheet trackers. They know how many candidates they source. They know how many candidates they chose to chase of the ones they identified. And they know how many ones they did phone screens on. That's their catch rate. You just want to measure the difference between the catch rate when you started chasing versus when you actually screened or scheduled the screen.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, kind of
spreadsheet calculation.
Yeah, I've seen it, to your point, Eric, around spreadsheets. And really, if you just start off with like I always recommend, hey, don't put one in, call them, put one in, call them, build your list out. And then as you work through it, you kind of move them to the next tab or change their status. That's an example of lead conversion, right? Because we're really talking about pre-applications, right? These are before they get into your ATS. So this is outside of any ATS. Another piece that works to me is kind of interesting to kind of get maybe it's not an exact number ongoing, but if you're a recruiter who has a LinkedIn recruiter account, if you're utilizing LinkedIn project folders, right? You put them in a folder, they have a status, same premise. As long as you remember to update those statuses as they go through, you're able to start to get conversion numbers or the not now but later type people. So that's another piece where they're speaking with me. I've converted them from a lead, somebody we don't know, to a contact, somebody I do know. We're moving forward in the hiring process. Or the other path is down the road. They weren't interested, and here's why, but they're interested later. That type of piece of it to kind of.
And the numbers are very different for cold leads or recruited leads versus applicants who applied to the job.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep track of both of them. We keep track of the inbound leads, ad response, versus outbound leads, research response. And we also keep track by channel, because the response rate on a LinkedIn profile that has no date updated is very different than a job posting, a job on on Indeed or Monster or Career Builder that actually has a date when someone actually posted the job recently, or a recently updated flag on LinkedIn Recruiter that says they are open to new opportunities. Is very different than something that has been recycled from your applicant tracking system.
Mm-hmm.
So just something to keep track of. If you find a recruiter who knows those numbers, they're extraordinary. They've taken the time to understand the importance of chase, which is part of the perseverance, is part of the organization, is part of the endurance that makes a good recruiter. Because I think the chase part is the most tedious part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Tracy, were you going to say something? Sorry, it looked like you were.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, typically, no, I'm not a statistical type of person, so no, I do not. I keep track in my applicant tracking system, but to your point, I don't keep track that. I don't keep track like that. I don't do like an Excel spreadsheet or anything. But what I do is I'll call someone 3 times, and then I will email them. And then the 4th time I will shoot them a text message. And then if I don't hear back from them, I just take it as though they're not really interested in the role. But I try to use I try to be as creative as I can, especially if there are really, like if it's one of those candidates, again, you've had one of those hard to fill roles and you're like, oh my God, here's the person. Oh yeah, that's kind of how it's like, I'm going to call them, I'm going to email them, and I'm going to text them.
Candidates love that persistency. They do. They really appreciate it.
Right. I'm not a overly over chaser, like I'm not going to, call somebody 7, 8, 9, 10 times, because my thought is basically, I'm just not going to do it. There's some other viable candidates out there.
Yeah, Tracy, I'm with you. Like normally I'll get a candidate. So to your point, like the emails and the phone calls. So like 3 phone calls and 3 emails. So you're touching them 6 times. And then if you're also doing a text at the end, that's 7 times, and they still haven't responded back to you, they don't really want the job. I mean, maybe they're having a bad day and just decide to hit apply, and now they're no longer interested. But I've had candidates who I chased down for a week, and then 2 weeks later they call me back and say, "Hey, like remember, like you called me." But I was busy. I'm like going, if they say that they're in Europe or something like that, like usually give them the benefit of the doubt. But I'm like, I've called you so many times and now the role's filled.
Right.
And
many recruiters though are one and done. They'll send one email, maybe a follow-up phone call, and then that's it. And we've had some of our top performers on the team be the one and done specialists because they were so good at spamming and volume recruiting that they would send out 150 emails, and that 1 or 2% response rate was enough for them to fill the job. But they clear cut or unfortunately gave a bad brand impression to the rest of the 98 candidates that they ignored when they called back and didn't follow up with, that the other recruiters on the team had to deal with later when we tried to approach them maybe for future campaigns months or years later, because the first person was so rude to them. So it can impact more than just the individual on the team.
No, absolutely.
Eric, is that guy the reason why LinkedIn put that minimum 13% response rate?
Yeah, wasn't my guy.
I don't know if everybody knew that, but in LinkedIn emails, you need I think the magic, is it still 13%?
It is.
Is that
Yeah, you go to in-mail jail for 10 days.
Yeah.
Yep.
Has anybody ever been in it?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I have too. I've had my
It's hard with some locations too. It can be challenging.
I've gotten my account suspended twice.
Oh no.
Just because this is like I was on there when one of my pride and joys. Oh, it's on there when they had 200,000 people. And I uploaded my whole database and sent out invites. I didn't know you couldn't do that. I had
Right.
to, this is when you
Right.
could get somebody on the phone too, back in LinkedIn. I was
Yep.
on the phone with their compliance guy or whatever, and I kind of begged and cried, and he gave it back to me. But I'm just like, I'm an active user. It's part of the game. For everybody, if you're not tracking your numbers and you have somebody who's good with reporting your ATS, to me, those really are, hey, you may not get what Eric was specifically talking about, but whoever's in charge of your reporting, your ATS, should be able to give you out some numbers that you have for yourself or what have you. I know I overdo that at places I go, so there's always a way.
I have a great spreadsheet I can share with anybody if they need it. Gladly, already calculated.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to throw in my top, and I think it kind of plays off, Eric, a little bit with yours, but then also Tracy with yours around candidates. So being in operations, I had onboard recruiters, right? Teaching them the system, it's this, that, and the other. The one thing that I was always impressed with, and being in both from the agency and the corporate world, is I was always impressed with that recruiter that had their network. And it's not really a network of other recruiters, but it was the network of people that they recruited for. And if, we switch jobs in recruiting, it's not like it's a lifer job. So there's our switches, and I always likened it to the old school Rolodex, right? They put their Rolodex wherever they went. But when I saw people come in with already having a network, and this is sort of, I work in Silicon Valley a lot, so they switch around a lot. So you'd see this around like critical talent groups, whether it's biotech or sales or developers, they had their network of talent. So when they got a rec, they would have this list that they'd go to, and they'd kind of source from that list. So having that ready go-to, people know me, kind of Eric, to your point that I call them callbacks, right? When you reach out and they call back, that's your callback rate, your response rate. They had high rates because these are people they already knew, already had relationships, easy to get referrals from. They had that one professional relationship to another professional. You do you, I do me type deal. So when I've seen guys come in and women who had this ready to go to network, I look at them and they're like a player in their industry, and people knew them and they would talk to people, not just when they had a job in hand or what have you. So I was always extremely impressed when I saw that Rolodex of people ready to go. So that was totally aside from being able to process applicants as they came through, to being able to source, which is a key skill to have, to source new, but having that network and being able to figure out how to keep it fresh and up to date. Back in the day with LinkedIn, you're on my LinkedIn network, and you could hit export and you'd get everybody's names, current titles, current companies, and their email address. Well, that's gone now. Can't get their email addresses anymore. So how do you maintain? Where are you now? Do I still got your right email? Did you give me your personal email? Is that your work email? Oh, you switched jobs. Your work email doesn't work. So being able to have that tight network of talent that you recruit for, I think as you get into niche companies, I saw it a lot in biotech. I saw it, I did a run at Salesforce.com, and they're all about salespeople, right? So having that network of salespeople who could work in SaaS, to have that at the behind the scenes, I always thought that was an example of what I would call having a black belt in recruiting. So that's mine. Does anybody want to comment on that or anything in general? We're coming up to that 45-minute mark. Again, we went over that 30-minute mark, but the conversation was good and still rolling. Does anybody have any final comments? All right, Tracy, I'm going to follow up with you because you got nice long text with questions around your candidate relationships.
Yeah, I'd love to hear her answers on that too. When you guys connect, if you could send an email, she got some great questions.
All right, so how about this? Once I'll post this up on LinkedIn. I'll send out the link to everybody. Tracy, how about I kind of call out the questions from Joel Elmer, and you kind of add in a response there?
Okay.
They're not like I got you questions or anything. They're really good questions.
There was that, and then there was the question about how she can how to go about and ask for referrals. I think too, when you have somebody that maybe didn't get the job.
Yeah, I'll go back into the whole chat and find out any questions from there. I'm sorry, I got caught up in the conversation again, and I didn't do a good job of keeping an eye
There
on
were two
that.
Q&As too, Sean, I saw
Oh,
in there. So yeah, I'd love to. I got to run too. I got at 1:45, but thank you so much for letting me join. I'm looking forward to all of Tracy's answers.
my pleasure. Thank you,
Nice seeing you
everybody.
guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
day. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.